college admissions scandal has rocked the nation, with at least 33 parents being accused of participating in this cheating scheme to get their children into various competitive schools. More indictments could be coming as federal investigators are expanding their probe into other schools, into other students, potentially parents. For more insight on all of this, let's bring in trial attorney Brad Micklin. Thanks for being here today. Kicking things off, I was actually in the courtroom a little earlier this month, and it was absolutely packed with suits. They were literally filling the jury box there in the room. It was the first status hearing. Parents weren't required to be there, but these lawyers gave us a little bit of insight into what we could expect as far as defense strategy is concerned. They wanted to see FBI reports of parents who potentially were not charged in this case. And it seems to be one strategy taking shape will be to contend that these parents, their clients, thought they were making donations versus bribes. What do you think of that strategy?
I think it's a bad strategy. I personally think most of the remaining defendants are on a crash course for prison because the focus has solely been on what the money is or isn't for. But that still leaves them exposed on the mail fraud and conspiracy charges, which carry up to 40 years in prison. So I think the money is the secondary issue.
Yeah, you know, when you're talking about potential prison sentences, we will see the first sentencing in this case a little later on this week. One of the coaches, John Vandemore, the former sailing coach at Stanford, is had pled guilty, of course, to conspiracy to commit racketeering. That carries a possible 10-year prison term, the government recommending 18 months in his case. We will see what happens when he goes before the judge. He is among those really kind of the standard issue in this case. Essentially, they make the arguments that some students paid $500,000 ultimately to the Stanford sailing program through this mechanism. The judge doesn't have to follow the prosecution's recommendation, though. How closely do you think the lawyers, the clients, the parents, the other coaches and administrators that are charged, whether they chose to plead at this point in time and are going forward, how closely will be people watching this first sentencing?
I think it's going to be very close, and what we're waiting to see is sort of the baseline for sentencing, which is why with the sailing coach, I think the prosecutor actually reduced the original recommendation, because I think they want to set a low baseline so that future charges, which will be more severe and have more money involved, will have a greater flexibility and a greater range. They're not going to be locked into a high sentence recommendation that may eliminate pleas in the future.
And will it make a difference? For instance, the set of parents, the first to plead guilty, the Isaacsons, Bruce and Davina, there are the couple that allegedly funneled $600,000 through the ringleader of this scam in an effort to get their kids into USC and UCLA. They expressed a lot of regret. They put out an apology saying no words can express how profoundly sorry we are for what we have done. They're set to be sentenced in a couple of weeks. They would be, it appears, and unless some court schedule changes, that they would be the first parent sentenced. Could we see that being different from this first coach being sentenced? And will their open regret make a difference?
It will make a difference, even though I think it's an empty open regret. But part of the guidelines for sentencing is it's a point system. And one of the evaluation that they need to look at is whether or not the defense accepts responsibility for their actions. So those, like these parents who pled early and speak of remorse and regret, will probably get a lower sentencing recommendation.
For instance, Felicity Huffman, who pled a little earlier, she only paid $15,000, so a small amount of money, at least compared to many of the other parents involved in this case. She was very tearful before the judge as she made her plea. And then you contrast that against Lori Loughlin, her husband, Massimo Giannulli, who are essentially at this point, it seems to be going forward, getting closer and closer to a potential trial. If you were an attorney recommending which path these parents should take, what would you say?
I would have told them to jump ship like Huffman did in the beginning and take a plea, because there's an overwhelming amount of evidence and an overwhelming amount of co-conspirators that are already giving testimony. And whether the money, first of all, I don't think people are going to believe she paid $500,000 as a donation. But if she submitted anything to the colleges that was fraudulent or false, either in the application or the acceptance, then she's committed mail fraud, and there's no way around that. That's a 20-year sentence possibility.
And finally, one of the more interesting things also to come out of court was this idea of foster hearings. And essentially, there's an argument being made, which just speaks to kind of how broad and how big some of these legal firms are and how connected some of the parents may be, that there are conflict of interest involved, that attorneys essentially involved in one case may also be involved in another case, or a coach and a parent, that sort of thing. And the judge wants to see those parents in court and talk about conflict of interest. How much of a play do you think that'll be in this as it goes forward?
Well, it's not a conflict yet. It's more of the appearance of a possible conflict, because some of the attorneys represent some of the schools and some of the parents, but not in the same action. Now, if we see any of the schools taking private action, like a civil action against any of the parents, then we're going to have an actual conflict, and that's when they're going to have to address it. But they really should be looking at it now because it could interfere with this ongoing criminal prosecution.
Yeah, no doubt they want to get things out of the way, and certainly we'll keep things very busy in federal court in Boston. Brad Micklin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Molly.